Coming up on the NESN Bruins Podcast, we look back at an instant classic and dissect the fight-filled Saturday night affair between the Bruins and the Lightning. We also look at Tuukka Rask's season as he reaches yet another milestone. And we also take a look at some of the line changes Bruce Cassidy made and whether they might stick down the stretch. Play the music. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the NESN Bruins Podcast. NESN.com's Mike Cole, joined, as always, by NESN.com's Logan Mullen. Logan, how are we?
Good, Mike. How are you?
Fine for now.
Yeah, good. Cool.
So
no coronavirus. Get the coronavirus
yeah.
jokes out of the way.
Yeah. It's nothing to joke about.
No.
And actually, it is something maybe we should talk about at some point later in the show.
Provide our medical opinions.
No, the idea we could be looking at empty arena hockey games. Actually, very soon, because San Francisco, Oakland area, San Jose, they're shutting it all down. The Bruins go to San Jose
10
next
days,
week.
right? Yeah.
So if it might even be, I don't know what day today is. Actually, yeah, it's next Saturday.
It's the 21st, right?
So, all right. So yeah, we're here to talk about the Bruins as we always do. I guess real quick, we can just kind of review the week that was. I should probably pull up the schedule.
Get nice and prepared. A little bit of dead air.
So the Bruins won. So today is Tuesday. We're doing this. So the Bruins. Today is Wednesday. So the Bruins won Tuesday night. Big game Saturday, which we will. The bulk of this podcast will center around that tremendous hockey game Saturday night against the Lightning. So they lost that game. They won Tuesday night in Philly. Was there another game in between then?
No. Between then, no.
Or since
between
last time
Tampa and Philly.
No, I know that. Yeah. This is my
off to a smashing start. There was the loss to the Panthers. That was the day win over the Panthers. I'm sorry. The Krug overtime winner.
Right, yeah.
Where Carlo got hurt.
So we are all on board here. All right. So any real, top level thoughts from last week?
No, I mean, they've played well the last week. It's been business as usual for them. So there's really not much to take away from it. I mean,
it's literally everything we've talked about every week.
Right, since October. I mean, they didn't get the result they wanted against the Lightning, but I think that really, in the broad scheme of things, I mean, they've run away with the division. You probably running away with the President's Trophy as well. So I don't think anyone was really put off by the loss to Tampa, considering all the kind of sidebars, distractions, extracurriculars, what have you, in that game, and how the Bruins fared in that respect. And I think that's the biggest story of the last week was how they handled themselves against Tampa.
Yeah, so let's just get into it. I mean, I think there was that 5, 10, 15-minute stretch there that was the most entertaining hockey.
Yeah, the back half of the second period.
Right, maybe even going back a few years. Like, it felt, because there was a time there from like 2009 through 2013, 14, like the Lucic era. I'm trying to, like, Thornton, obviously, the Merlot line, that whole entire thing where you would get 3 or 4 of those gong shows a season. I mean, the Dallas game, and I think it was
the line brawl one
stands out. There was another Dallas game in there.
Weird stuff does always happen when they play the Stars.
Right. So there's a few of them. And I mean, the general evolution of the NHL has kind of rid the sport of a lot of games like that. And by and large, I mean, it seemed like every whistle there was gatherings, but it wasn't like there were 6 line brawls. Yeah. It was all pretty tight in that one spot. But I did think that was like the most entertaining hockey the entire season, because the fights aside, and I think there was 94 combined penalty minutes in that game, and most of them came in a 5-minute chunk of game time. Penalties aside, they were going back and forth there for a while. The Lightning ultimately win that game, large part because they scored 2 shorthanded goals on the Bruins' first power play. which was a pretty horrendous way to start the game.
Yeah.
But I think it was a nice preview of what could come if these two teams meet in the playoffs, and I'm very much rooting for these two teams to meet in the playoffs.
Especially because they had played each other just a few days prior, too, down in Tampa.
And I was going to say, that's why if you want to talk about the actual result, if you're looking at it from Bruins perspective, I don't put too much into it because Tampa needed that game a lot more than the Bruins. But as you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially after losing on their own ice. Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that stood out to me the most was that it seems like Tampa, with their trade deadline moves, getting Blake Coleman, who plays a little bit heavier, getting Barclay Goodrow and giving up what they did for him, picking up Zach Bogosian, they were trying to send a message that they were not going to get pushed around like they did by Columbus last year. In isolated incidents and isolated games like Saturday, I think they can handle that. What I'd be curious to see is, can not only the Lightning, but the Bruins and some other teams actually keep that up for a 7-game series? And I thought both teams on Saturday did a pretty decent job of balancing the score settling physically versus the hockey itself. Like, you could tell that, all right, there are guys who are trying to make other guys pay for perceived transgressions at other points in the game. But, I mean, it was still a narrow meeting. You know, the Pastrnak gets that late goal, and the Bruins are back within one up until the empty netter. So it was still 2019, 2020 hockey, right? Where there was a little bit of the physical stuff, but even for that, it's not like that necessarily commandeered the game. I think it felt like it because we just don't see that style anymore. Right. But it was still a relatively fair balance. So my reason in saying that is I'd be curious to see how much that would, if the Bruins and Lightning meet in the second round is when it likely would be, would we see that type or even a bit more toned down type of that play over the course of a 7-game series? I could see it happening in like game 1 or game 2, and then both sides just buckling down, being like, all right, we'll do this if we need to, but otherwise we're not just going to go and throw weight and punch each other, you know, until the cows come home.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're not getting melees for the entirety of any series. And right. I think even in today's day and age too, especially, you would get the thing where reports would come out by if games 1, 2, maybe even 3 were complete tire fires in that regard, which I don't think they would be because I think there's so much on the line. These two teams know that, and they're both veteran laden. But if for some reason it got ridiculous in those first few games, you would hear stories about like, you know, half of the NHL's front office is in attendance for game 4.
Yeah.
Basically
George Peros is there.
Right. Yeah, right. Exactly. Telling them to cut the crap. So yeah, I think they would settle down, but there would be that undercurrent from the beginning of just nastiness. And we saw it kind of like, I think it would be similar to the Cup final last year. Just you're going into it knowing that that's where it is, where it kind of the Cup final had to build, and it built pretty quickly, just with the general nature of those two teams. And I think it's probably interesting to note that one of the common pieces between those, the Blues series and then a potential Lightning series, even just in the Lightning's regular season series with the Bruins this year, is Pat Maroon.
Right.
And he talked about it after the game, saying, you know, this could be there's some bad blood brewing. So why don't we hear from him real quick?
I feel like we're getting a little bad blood right now. I think we're starting to stir the pot here a little bit, which is fun. You know, going into meaningful games down the stretch here, and Boston's the team. You know, like what they accomplished last year and what they're accomplishing this year. I mean, you know, that's a team to beat, and it's good to start a little rivalry here against a good hockey team and a team that plays the right way, like I said, and they play tough and they like to stick up for their teammates.
So yeah, I think this game is going to be used as a building block, but for any series going into the playoffs, if these two teams end up meeting, is that, you know, this is going to be because they don't play again, right? In the regular season. So this is going to be the last image, the last thing, I think. And, you know, if you get to that point, you're going to have probably the two best teams in the NHL fighting for a chance to go to the conference final. Yeah. And a game that's going to be, you know, a lot of people are going to say the winner of this is the prohibitive Stanley Cup favorite, you know, and probably whoever wins that series should be the favorite. So what did you want to touch on?
Well,
real quick
so
here
there's a line in Friedman's 31 Thoughts column today that said, "Not every Tampa game features multiple line brawls, but it hasn't gone unnoticed that the Lightning are an edgier, nastier bunch, and they want you to know it." So that last line,
Sure.
and they want you to know it. I feel like if you have to try so hard to convince other people of something, then within you, you at least know that there's part of the outside that's correct.
Yeah.
Right? So if you have to keep saying, no, we're tough, that's because part of you knows that, well, maybe you're not as tough as you'd like other people to think that you are. So, and we don't have to go back down this rabbit hole again, but I do think that at a certain point that starts to subside over the course of a series, and maybe you see the Bruins, because they went through it 2 months ago after the whole thing in Columbus with Emil Bemstrom, where the Bruins for a little bit had to kind of show other teams or put on full display that they're capable of playing that way. But otherwise, it went away a little bit. Things went back to normal, I guess. So I'd be curious to see if the Lightning are just still dealing with this aftermath of bulking up at the trade deadline and saying, no, like we're not just going to get pushed around, and then crossing their fingers that teams don't actually try and make them answer for that.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, who are they?
This is all such a subjective thing too, right? Like there's no way to quantify toughness.
And it's also worth noting we don't know what the value. There's clearly no tangible value of toughness, especially in the playoffs. And the intangible value of toughness it's weird.
It's probably overstated.
Well, it depends. It's like, what do you define toughness as? Like, is toughness going to the net and getting your head kicked in while you're trying to, screen the goalie or whatever? You know what I mean? Knowing you're going to get 6, cross checks to the kidney, like that's tough. That's not necessary, because that's where the toughness is going to manifest itself more often than like having to fight somebody or throw a hip check in the neutral zone. Like that just doesn't happen as much. Or I guess it maybe the latter does, and that's tighter checking. But like this kind of game doesn't happen as much. I mean, you want to go back a few years ago, like the Canadiens and the Senators had a game where it just felt like every time they dropped the puck, it was, a line brawl, stage fighting across the board. But you get one game in a 7-game series, and you kind of go from there. So yeah, that's not as valuable probably, but I do think it's important for the Lightning to. Yeah, I think it's this game and those quotes or that backgrounded source information kind of just tells you that they're trying to take on a new identity here, and it's just something that they feel better. I think they feel more confident about their ability to play that type of game if they need to than they did 3 or 4 weeks ago, probably.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think
that makes them a more dangerous team overall.
For sure, because if they can deploy that when they need to, good for them. More power to them. I think sometimes they might be like, I felt like last year the Bruins were more reactionary in terms of toughness. So what was it in the Toronto series? They didn't have Backes playing in game 1. I think it was. They healthy scratched him. Then they were getting knocked around in game 2. They had pretty much come out and said, like, we're going to be way more physical. And this is the Toronto series. And you see David Backes coming. You see the Bruins left and right throwing their weight around. And then it just kind of went back a little bit. I feel like if you get the Bruins and Lightning in a series, will it just be two teams that say, you know what, we're going to let the skill kind of take over? Then if one team crosses the line, or however you want to put it, then we'll start playing that physical type of game? Or are they both going to just or are they just going to come right out of the chute and be like, this is going to be a physical, nasty series? Because when you boil it all down, that's not really who these two teams are. Like, they have players who can do that. They can use that style of play, but that's not their identity.
We're getting
either of them
way ahead of ourselves. But I mean, we've spent the last 5-10 minutes getting ahead of ourselves talking about a playoff series that doesn't exist yet and may never exist. But
the Bruins lose to the Rangers in the first round,
or Tampa loses to Toronto. I mean, but if Tampa comes into that series and their main objective is to prove how tough they are, I do think that favors the Bruins.
Yeah,
and I think,
you're probably losing that series.
And I don't even know if
you're the Lightning.
Right. I don't even know if the Bruins are the tougher team. I think if I had to pick, I would say that they were the tougher team. But like, it has nothing to do with, or has something to do with that. But I think it has more to do with the fact that if Tampa goes into a series and says we're gonna toughness our way to a 7-game series win, they're misguided because they're the most talented team in hockey. Like, I think they're still that should be their number one priority. That's their best route to winning the Stanley Cup.
They're too talented to have Pat Maroon and Barclay Goodrow be the two most important players in the series.
But it helps to have them. They're enforcers, Gordon. You're going to need them when you play Iceland, like that thing from D2. Like it's it's good to have the toughness, but your top level skill is going to take you to where you want to go. And I think that even becomes more prevalent if and when Stamkos returns and gets healthy and all of that.
When you look at the Bruins last year, as much as people like to say that the Bruins lost to the Blues because they weren't tough enough, they lost to the Blues because their first line couldn't score.
Well, and they also lost to the Blues because they got their
teeth kicked in at the Garden.
Which it's not necessarily they weren't as tough as the Blues. It's like the Blues just had an advantage that we probably should have paid more attention to.
Comes back to how you measure it.
I think we did talk about this. The size of their decor helped them kind of wear down and rub out the Bruins. And that, I think the first line is a piece of that as well. Like Pasternak clearly
especially because he was not healthy. Pasternak.
Right, but he doesn't love that style of hockey. And I mean, not a lot of guys do in his position either. It's not necessarily a knock on him. But so I think it wasn't necessarily toughness. It was just matchup things. And those things kind of take their, we'll have plenty of time to get into that if the Bruins and Lightning play in the playoffs. One thing I did want to talk about, and I think we've kind of been a Lightning-centric Bruins podcast here, but I just want to hear from Bruce Cassidy real quick and Tuukka Rask, both of them kind of talking about, again, this is the theme of the show, the toughness and how they respond to situations where they kind of need to get tough. So let's hear from Cassidy first, and we can discuss, and then we'll get to Rask as well.
Well, there's value in sticking up for one another. There's a value in responding. Of course, there is. And some nights it's more important than the outcome. I'm not going to sit here and say one or the other. We'll look through it, but we wanted to respond. There was, we thought a high hit early on Kasha. He's been out. We responded well, and it was kind of on from there, the physicality part. So I think both teams, kind of went toe to toe in that regard. So yeah, there's a lot of value in that. We pride ourselves in that. In fact, it was discussed earlier this year that we didn't have enough of that, and I certainly feel we do.
Okay, so the most interesting thing I think Cassidy said is, and I think this is a very fair point, one that's not made enough over the course of an 82-game schedule, is that it's okay to lose games. And this is going to sound almost...
He's in a position where he can say
that. That's true. Yeah, they are. And, not a lot of teams...
I don't think DJ Smith could go out and say that right now.
But, like, there is something to be said for, and this is going to sound borderline Neanderthal, like, sending a message or whatever. But, like...
Sure.
No, like, you're not going to... Like, you knew you were going to get pushback from the Lightning going into Saturday night. They came in. They tried to bring it. There was a questionable hit that the Bruins didn't like, and say what you want about that hit or, any number of hits in that game. But they decided they were kind of... This game on both sides felt more like it was designed to set up the next game whenever that may come. Because both teams kind of are locked into their own respective playoff spots. I mean, the Bruins are going to be the first seed in the Atlantic, and the Lightning are probably going to be the second.
Well, I think that was the toughness was the one area where you could legitimately question it about the Bruins.
It's like taking a test.
Right. Like their forward lines are fine, like their forward talent. Their defensive depth, fine. Their goaltending, fantastic. But like in terms of the more intangible type things, that was something that was... You could question it and not be wrong for doing so. And so I think for the Bruins, because they're in a position where it's like, hey, we've already proven that we can score. We've already proven that we can defend, on and on and on. They hadn't always proven that they could be the quote unquote tough hockey team, big bad Bruins, all that crap. And so I think that, if you're going to lose a game, you might as well be at least be able to say, well, we lost, but for one, we're still 7 or 8 points up in the division. And we showed that, like, hey, if you try and mess around with us, we're going to fight back. We're going to push back.
Right, exactly. I think that's the most important. I mean, clearly the most important thing from this game for the Bruins because they lost the game. Right. So you didn't get the 2 points.
They did not. And I was in the locker room after the game. That was before all the coronavirus stuff forced us out.
Cherish that memory.
But it was not like a bad atmosphere in there. They weren't sulking or anything like that. I mean, Tuukka Rask was cracking jokes and whatnot. Like they were candid and they weren't too like cheerful and yippee and all that stuff. Like you could tell they lost, but I've been in there for in some solemn Bruins dressing rooms before, and that was not one of those nights.
It's weird though, because like for a team that knew that they were going to get pushback from the Lightning, they sure played a pretty crappy first period.
Yeah,
and even into the
can't be giving up two two power play goals or two shorthanded.
That being said, they responded well, and they made that a game. So I think we're learning a lot about them as the season kind of goes on. And I mean, we learned a lot about them for the entirety of the season because it's just really been a bounce back effort for the entire season. That's really the theme, right? You lose Game 7 at home, the Stanley Cup final.
This whole year is
not entirely surprising. You don't make the playoffs next year, let alone contend for a Stanley Cup again.
Win the President's Trophy.
Toughness is legit. I think it's interesting that Cassidy mentioned that. I don't know if that's a tweak in him being like, well, look how tough we are. We always. I think there's always a question about that, or not internally or externally or even fair, but like I think he expected his team to have to answer his own criticisms because I think we've talked about this before multiple times. Like he called them out publicly and privately, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And I think that this is actually, if he sits back there, if he's in a private moment in his office on Saturday night, he's like, you know what? I really like the way we responded. And that he can sit there and say, that message got through to my team. We are going in the right direction. And this is more proof of that. So,
yeah.
That all started with, you want to go back to
almost 2 months to the day now.
Is it really? It's been
I
that
think
long?
it was January 14th, January 13th, something like that.
Right. So in Columbus, Tuukka Rask takes the elbow to the head. And I didn't see this in the post-game stuff. I mean, I didn't dig through it too much. But you were there. Tuukka kind of referenced.
He got asked about how his team responded to the whole Columbus thing. And Rask, I mean, we'll let him explain it, but he kind of downplayed it. But one thing that was a little ambiguous, but I found to be interesting, was that he mentioned guys started chirping. So why don't we just jump to that sound real quick?
Yeah, let's hear from Tuukka.
We've always had that. I think that's one of those things. Nobody saw what happened in that situation, but then, like people start chirping and, it was just so behind the play that nobody saw what happened. If anybody would have seen it, I'm sure they would have reacted. But obviously when guys get called out, they're going to show that, what we're all about. And it's never been an issue for us that we don't stick up for each other. I think, we just showing it more.
Yeah, so that's Saturday night after a fight-filled game in which they kind of had to respond and kind of stand up to the challenge. So I think it's interesting that both he and Cassidy talked about it. I mean, sure, they're answering questions about it, but like, it's still that was a big moment in their season. I think is a fair point to make.
Yeah, and that goes back to the point I was making just a couple minutes ago, is that they've proven they can do everything else, all other phases of the game. And so that's kind of the next box to check off before the postseason comes around. And I think they probably have to be a little cautious of getting carried away these last few weeks, because you don't want guys getting hurt before the postseason because you're trying to, get into a pissing contest about who's tougher. But, what else do they have to accomplish during the regular season, right? Like they'll play
healthy,
right? They'll play 500 hockey the rest of the way and still walk away with the division.
Yeah.
So what does it matter to them?
Sure. Hell of a game. I'll sign up for 7 more in the spring. Let's get to Tuukka Rask real quick. We just mentioned him. I don't know what you want to, just a quick Tuukka check-in. Celebrated his 33rd birthday Tuesday night in Philly with the 50th career shutout, which is insane. He's actually second in the NHL this year. Maybe I should have known this, or this isn't as surprising as it to you as it is to me. He's second in the NHL in shutouts with 5. Feels like he's kind of flown under the radar this year. The goaltending situation in general is kind of flown under the radar.
And it is going to be interesting to see how people start to measure goaltending tandems when it comes to voting for end of the season awards, because a lot of people are saying, oh, well, Tuukka should be in the conversation, if not the front runner for the Vezina. I don't disagree with that, but are other voters going to look and say, well, you've got a guy like Andrei Vasilevsky who's playing in 70% of his team games, and Rask has pretty much a 50-50 split with Jaro Halak. So how can you in good conscience give it to him?
Like Connor Hellebuck.
Or Connor Hellebuck.
57 games. Like I saw people
he should get Hart Trophy votes.
Exactly.
Yeah, because the Jets aren't even remotely in a playoff position if not for Connor Hellebuck.
So if I had to vote, I probably would vote for Hellebuck.
Yeah,
to be honest with you, but like I do think
you're going to see some weird names pop up on the ballot, and Elvis Merzlikins will probably end up there.
Well, do you know who leads the league in save percentage? Without looking at it? You're closing your eyes.
I do. I do. I saw it earlier today, but I don't know.
Anton Hudobin.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's
so. I think
is
Rask
the voting going to evolve?
Yeah, Rask is going to get votes. I think the workload for now, until every team kind of employs the same goalie share, I think workload should be factored into it. So for that reason, he probably won't win, but I do think he deserves consideration.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's been good.
He has. I would agree with that.
Especially when Halak hasn't been as good as he was last year.
No.
So I think they've kind of needed Rask to be even better than he was last year.
Yeah. Wonder if that influences them on their decision to bring back or not bring back Yarrow over.
Well, I think they're.
over
I mean,
the
depending
summer.
on we talked about the salary cap last year, I think they might be priced out of Halak. I mean, he's older, but like I think he's still going to get a decent contract.
I mean, they've got the best goaltending tandem in the AHL too, with Max Lagacé
So I would
and Dan
imagine-
Vladar, who both are. I think Vladar's an RFA. He might be a UFA, and Lagacé is only on a 1 year.
So I
deal,
think
too.
that's like the thing where they look at it, it's like, let's take this risk. It's just
right.
it is a risk because we've seen in the last 2 years how effective it can be, but
Because
the
neither
money,
of
I
them
think,
are
is just
proven
gonna
NHL
be-
goalies.
Sure.
Oh, right, but think of all the doors you open by paying, Lagacé or Vladar $1 million, as
especially
opposed to
what's Halak making this year?
2.75.
So he's
I think
probably
he
over
might get.
3.
Yeah,
right?
he will.
3.5.
It's a robust goalie market, though.
Yeah, that's
I
a
mean,
good point, yeah.
you think about some of the guys that might hit the market. I mean, Robin Leonard will be there. Corey Crawford. I believe Khudobin might also be a RFA 2. Malcolm Subban. Bring Khudobin back.
Subban.
It just, the Bruins goaltending
Yeah,
has
no
their
kidding.
fingerprints all over the goalie market this year. So I don't know. I started to think that Halak would probably get a bigger deal next year than he would what he's presently making. I'm not so sure about that now because there are so many options out there. Holtby's going to
Sure,
be
and he's not having as good of a year either.
Yeah, he's not. Holtby's going to be a free agent. I mean, you go down the list, it's all over. I think Jimmy Howard's going to be a free agent. I don't know if there's an NHL job for him still.
Never mind. I was looking something up, but it does not matter. Real quick, we should probably talk about this because this actually I think is a pretty noteworthy thing. Bruce Cassidy fired up the blender again Tuesday night, changing up the lines. I guess at the end of the game, it was weird because it was one of those things where I was like, huh, is that? I was like, in the middle of a line shift.
Andre Kasha on the first
right,
line.
yeah, exactly, right. So Kasha moved up to the first line, was skating with Marchand Bergeron. Corrali was on Krejci's left wing with Pasternak on the right. Richie skating third line left wing. Coyle centering that line, and DeBrusk on the right, and the fourth line unchanged. I know you wrote about this for NESN.com, but do you have any other big takeaways from this?
Not really.
I think it's
it
interesting. I think you're gonna see a lot of this down the stretch.
Yeah, and I think it validates my point too that they have to kind of tailor the lineup around Nick Ritchie now, right? Like they're not going to put him on the top line. They've got Jake DeBrusk, who's been struggling, still playing on his offside. It's clear he doesn't like playing on his offside, but when they bump down Ritchie instead of saying, "Sorry, Nick, you're going to the right," it's DeBrusk on his offside. So sometimes I think Cassidy can get a little carried away for his own good, but why not give it a shot? Again, this comes back to the toughness things. Look at what's there. What harm does it have? The whole Pasternak playing with Krejci thing, that's always been a little bit better in theory than in practice, but give him a chance to see what's there.
And Kasha feels like the kind of guy who you're not losing a ton when he's up on the first line. It's weird though, because do you really want to mess with a line that is unironically referred to as the perfection line?
Yeah.
It's
I mean,
nuts.
they did it last year every now and again, putting Heinen up there. They've tinkered around with it, and I think you don't want to forecast injuries, but what happens if a top line guy gets hurt? You need to know who can play up there.
And if Kasha looks good and they perform well, if you run in the same issue you had last year where the first line runs cold in the playoffs,
right? You try
at
to
least
balance things back
break
out.
glass in case of emergency type of deal.
Sure.
Anything else?
No.
All right, we got other stuff to do, so we gotta bounce. We'll be back again next week to discuss all delightful. What do they need to do what the week looks like? Anything interesting coming up this week?
They've got the Sabres on Friday and then the Leafs on Saturday.
Yeah. And then actually next week's going to be a bear because they go California.
Oh, is that
trip.
the California trip?
So
Yeah, sure.
We'll have to figure something out.
That's going to be an awful trip too because it's the Sharks who are bad, the Kings who are bad, and the Ducks who are bad.
I think they should. Teams should start doing this. They should forfeit.
Why not?
Say we're gonna stay home.
You
We're
know
not
what they
going
should
out
do
there.
is
we don't want to deal with this coronavirus
they
nonsense.
they should forfeit it, and then if it
Quarantine
comes to the
themselves.
point where it's like, okay, we're jockeying for seeds now at the end of the year, they go and make some of those games up.
True.
But
Well, I think that's a little unfair, but yeah.
no, it is. It would never ever happen, and it shouldn't. But just
they
saying,
should,
if you
they
want
should
to
really sell it
get
too.
a little nuts,
They just don't feel like going to California in March, so they're just like, this coronavirus thing, everybody's taking it real seriously. It's like Bruce Cassidy at the podium with a surgical mask on. Like we're quarantining our guys for a week, and we'll see you again in a week.
well, I mean, their 5-game stretch upon hitting the road is going to be the Ducks, the Kings, the Sharks, the Red Wings, and the Senators. Just 5 nonsense games. Now, the Wings and the Red Wings and the Senators are back in Boston, but still, that's just 5 teams. That might be the 5 worst teams in the NHL.
I wonder.
I mean, I know they get murdered by the Red Wings every time they play them, but
Sure. I'm very much kidding about forfeiting. I think that should be pretty obvious. But like, as a player, I can imagine the California swing is kind of a fun one.
sure.
So I think there's
Especially when the results hardly matter for you too, right?
exactly. Yeah, a lot of corona of a different kind on that road trip.
I think we might start
Some
seeing
golf.
a lot more Anton Bleed, Carson Kuhlman, the call-ups, the Zach Sanetians.
I wonder if it begins to happen next week for that California trip.
Yeah, I bet they'd probably like. Yeah,
why bring them if you don't?
yeah, exactly. So
Some of those guys, I don't know.
I don't
It's a
know.
little
They
early to
might
go
want to
into that.
create a little bit more space.
Yeah.
I mean, because if you really start messing around too much, and that's like crap, we have to race to the finish. Because you probably
That's fair.
would prefer to be resting your guys the last 3 games of the season, right? Instead of resting them right now, and then whoops, you made a mistake, and Tampa caught back up, and now
Right.
you're defending the division. Although it'd probably be better to get second place in the Atlantic than first, considering your playoff matchup would be the Leafs or Panthers as opposed to the Islanders or the Hurricanes.
I'd be a terrible pro sports decision maker.
Yeah. That's why we're just sitting here flapping our gums.
All right, let's go. We're
Let's
done
go.
flapping our guns for the week. We'll be back again next week. Thanks for joining us on the NESN Bruins Podcast. See you.